Okay, now on to two orders which you will run into in the future. So one of these, in fact, we will spend a lot of time going over this semester. We're looking at the Siphonaptera and the Diptera. So, the fleas. The Siphonaptera, the word comes from the name siphon, meaning tube, and aptera, which means wingless. So these organisms are wingless in both the larval and the adult forms, but they evolved from a common ancestor that had wings. They therefore still have the muscles and things associated with wings, but the muscles have been used for very different things. Fleas are commonly associated with mammals and occasionally birds throughout the world, and the greatest diversity of fleas occurs in temperate zones. Now think about that. That's pretty unusual. We tend to see the greatest diversity of insects in tropical regions. So every time I mention a greater diversity of an insect in a temperate zone, I'm telling you it's unusual, right? So that's probably the third time you've heard that. Now, you have dealt with fleas before, more than likely. Fleas are blood-sucking external parasites. Most fleas feed on mammals. There are a few that feed on birds and things like that. For the most part, we will run into them on mammals. And the body form of the fleas is strongly adapted to its preferred hosts. So remember what I talked about preferred hosts? These are the hosts that these fleas have evolved with over time. The adults have very strong hind legs that are adapted for jumping. So look at these legs. But if you look at them, they don't have that sort of really overtly large musculature that we see in, say, Orthoptera, right, in the grasshoppers. And so when people see them, they often think, how the hell do they jump so well? So this is having to do with that musculature from the wings. So instead of having, say, really large thighs, so to speak, something like that, they've got extra muscles in their thorax, those that are usually there to power wings. Instead, though, in the fleas, they will power the legs. Okay, so they have this ability to jump with these old wing muscles. They also have laterally flattened bodies. It makes them really adept at moving through the host's fur or feathers. And it can make it really hard to capture fleas when you're trying to remove them from a host. Or when they're trying to get away from you, they can run either through the fur or the feathers or jump and hop away. Now, most fleas spend a considerable amount of time away from their host. They can survive for weeks or months without a blood meal. They go into a dormant state where they simply just shut down. And most of their body processes are rerouted to conserve energy. So this means, though, that just because you don't see fleas doesn't mean they aren't around. They can be hiding under the carpet or in other areas of wherever you're at. Now, I can't remember if I've told you a case that I worked for a friend. If I have, just ignore me now, but I'm going to tell you in case I haven't. So, back many years ago, I had this good friend who moved into a place in downtown LA, and it was one of those high-rise apartments, $3,000 a month. Yeah, and it was just, he was allergic to animals, and he got moved in, and he got covered in fleas after a few days. So he moved in on a Friday, and the whole house was jumping with fleas by Monday. It was nuts. So he sends me a message like, what is happening? Because he's allergic to animals. And so he did not bring in the fleas himself. He's never had a dog or a cat. And so, he's got fleas everywhere. He's freaking out. He calls the landlord. The landlord goes, oh, you must have done that. You must have brought them in. And so, my friend calls me, forensic entomologist, and I get to call the landlord like, hi, forensic entomologist here. You're full of BS. Fix it. And so through a little bit of back and forth and stuff, what we ended up happening was the place in this high-rise apartment downtown LA used to be rented to a woman who was a cat hoarder. She had just 1,000,001, it seemed like, cats in this little tiny apartment, just a few hundred square feet apartment. And so she was evicted by this landlord, and along with, the nasty smell that all these cats are going to leave behind, they of course had a nasty case of fleas. Now, the landlord didn't want to spring for getting an exterminator in, which is what you should do in these situations, if I may be so bold to say. And so he didn't want to do that, and so instead he just didn't rent the apartment for a few months, like 6 months. He came in one day, check out the apartment. He basically opened the windows. It didn't smell anymore. Everything was fine. There were no fleas jumping around, so then he rented it. The problem with this, though, is this ability for fleas to go dormant. So what they do is they will feed on blood, and then if their hosts go away, they, as the adults, will fall into the carpet or under linoleum or under the fridge, somewhere where it's nice and protected. And then they just shut everything down. So they just hang out, and they don't go through digestion. Their metabolism is at a bare minimum, and it takes them about 48 hours to restart, so to speak, all this metabolism. So they're just hanging out, and they restart in the presence of movement, of CO2, increased heat, and pressure. So think about all those things, right? So as my friend is moving into his apartment, he's walking over this carpet, he's putting pressure on these organisms. He's producing a lot of CO2. CO2 is indicative of a living organism walking by. He is upping the temperature in there. That's indicative of a living organism. So all that movement tells these fleas, okay, we've got a living organism here. They start to restart their metabolism. Takes about 48 hours. So he moves in on a Friday. By Monday, fleas were going nuts. He was getting bitten to death. So present this to the landlord, and he pays for a flea extermination. So fleas, they don't go quietly into the night, shall we say. They really fight for it. Now, fleas exhibit holometabolous metamorphosis. So they have eggs which hatch out into worm or caterpillar-like larvae. So that's what the larvae look like right here. They then go through several larval instars depending on the species, and they'll live in the nest if it's birds or small animals. They will live in bedding material. They'll live in soil outside. They often live very close to where their preferred hosts are going to be. The young will feed as scavengers in the environment, and they will also feed on the fecal material of the adults. Once they pupate, they will then hatch or close into the adult stage, which goes to find blood meals. So those are our fleas. Now onto flies. We are going to spend a lot of time on the flies this semester. So these are the Diptera. These are the true flies. And when I say true flies, when I say true flies, it's because you see a lot of words or a lot of common names for things like butterfly, right? Or I don't know, mayfly. Anytime you see fly, yeah. So a lot of things are called quote unquote flies. These are the actual flies. So di means two, ptera means wings. So the true flies only have a single pair of wings. They've got two wings on that mesothoracic region. Those hind wings, the metathoracic wings, are really, really reduced. And they're reduced into these little club-like structures that we call halteres. Halteres are there to help the flies fly around. They will vibrate during flight, a lot like a gyroscope, and they will help the insect maintain balance. Now, if you were to remove the halteres, then the fly wouldn't be able to balance while it's flying. So instead of flying straight, it'll fly like sideways and upside down and all that. And so this right here is a crane fly or a mosquito eater, as a lot of people call them. These are those halteres. You remove those, it's just not going to be able to fly straight. And it's kind of fun to do on a weekend. Rip the wings off of flies. I'm training serial killers. All right, so these are what the adult flies look like. They have two wings only. The larvae are legless. They live in aquatic or moist environments, and they're often called maggots. There might be a few other terms for them depending on the type of fly we're looking at, which we'll talk about starting probably around next week. But for the most part, they're maggots. Now, most of the larvae either have chewing mouth parts or mouth hooks that facilitate their feeding on decomposing matter. They can also help them as they parasitize other animals because Diptera are pretty diverse when it comes to what they feed on. Now, Diptera probably have the greatest economic impact on humans and animals, and they are most important for forensics simply because of their ability to decompose and show up very quickly. That's why we're going to be spending most of our time this semester on the flies. You'll get to know different orders and some species and how to identify them, so just be ready for that. Now, there are a bunch of other things going on with the flies. Some are pests of agricultural plants. Others transmit disease in the form of mosquitoes. I'll probably talk briefly about the mosquitoes because this is something you will have to deal with while out in the field. But yeah, they can transmit disease. They will feed on blood. Others are beneficial. So they're all over the map here. When we get to the flies, you're going to see that we break them up based into groups based on their external adult anatomy. So we've got our suborders of flies. One group of flies is characterized by aerostate antennae, and these aerostate antennae, which you can kind of see right there, see those little lumps? Remember aerostate antennae? These aerostate antennae act as airspeed indicators, so they allow the flies to sense how fast it is moving. But don't worry, we're not going to spend a lot of time right now. We'll wait for another week or so to really get into it. All right, with that, let me know if you have any questions.